In this video, we will show you how to replace your engine oil pan. On this Dodge Ram, this will be mounted directly to the bottom of your engine. Let's get into it. Alright friends, let's get started on our job. Make your way under your hood. Remove the oil cap, which is located on the driver's side valve cover. Once you have that off of there, let's also remove the oil dipstick. You'll find that engine oil dipstick right alongside of your alternator. Just go ahead and remove that. We'll give it a quick wipe and we can set this aside. Make your way to your negative battery terminal. We'll use an 11mm to loosen this nut just enough that we can remove the terminal from the battery. We'll set this aside so it's making no contact. Let's make our way over to the air filter housing. We're going to remove the air filter inlet. Take hold of that, give it a little wiggle, and we can slide that down. Once you've done that, we'll continue on with this little breather hose. You can pop that off of there. Along the driver's side of this, you'll find that you have a clamp, and then we can remove this. That clamp is located right down along the bottom where it connects to the throttle body. Use an 8mm or flathead. Loosen the clamp, give it a little wiggle, and lift it up and off. We'll set that aside. We'll cover that throttle body so nothing falls inside there, and now we can make our way under the vehicle. From underneath the vehicle, along the bottom of the engine, that's where you'll find your oil pan and the oil drain plug. We'll use a 16mm to drain the oil out of this. Make sure you have a collection bucket under there so you can recycle that fluid properly. Let's go ahead and clean up the area here. We'll give this a quick inspection. Now we can install our drain plug. We'll take this, start it in, and bottom it out. Now since you drained your oil, you might as well also replace the oil filter. Let's remove the oil filter using a large filter wrench. I'll put this on here and turn it counterclockwise. Got our collection bucket under here. Remove that oil filter. Now let's clean and inspect the area. Before you install your brand new oil filter, it's important to make sure that you prime it. What I mean by that is we'll be adding brand new oil directly into the center here. Once it starts coming out along the top, we'll take a glove finger and coat the seal. Let's get this in the vehicle. Let's install that filter. Take this and start it right on there. A little bit of oil will come out the top here, that's okay. We'll bottom that out by hand, and then we'll use our oil filter wrench and just make sure it's nice and snug. Clean your mess. At this point, let's make sure that we clean along the engine and the oil pan where they connect. So as we remove the oil pan, we don't necessarily have to worry about anything making its way into the engine. I'll get the other side of the engine as well. Along the driver's side of the oil pan, you'll find that you have a bracket that goes from the transmission all the way up along the starter and then connects into the engine block. We're going to remove that bracket. You'll find that you have two bolts. The bolt along the front is a 13mm, and along the back side going into that transmission is a 16mm. Let's start with the forward bolt. A quick note is our bracket is actually broken up along this forward area. Let's follow that bracket to where it connects onto the transmission. Hold the bracket, remove the 16mm headed bolt. Remove the bracket. Now we can start removing this bracket. To remove the bracket, you'll find that you have a 13mm headed bolt and a 16mm headed bolt. We'll remove the pair and that bracket. Hold on to the bracket. We'll give the bracket a quick inspection and we can set this aside. With the bracket out of the way, the next thing that we'll want to do is pay attention to our engine mounts. You'll have one of these on either side of the engine. On that engine mount, you'll find that you have a bolt that comes through it and it goes directly to the frame. On the frame itself, on each side of it, the front and the back, you're going to have a slot for that bolt to be able to go up and down through. We need to loosen this up just enough that we'll be able to slide the bolt up as we raise up the engine. We'll do the same on both sides. For this, we'll be using a 21mm for the nut and an 18mm for the bolt head. On the driver's side, the bolt goes through from the rear towards the front, and on the passenger side of the vehicle, it's the opposite. This one's nice and loose. I have plenty of clearance. I'll feel along the back side. That feels good as well. Let's make our way over to the passenger side and do the exact same thing. At this point, I've loosened this enough that it'll make it past these two flared out areas. Let's make our way along the front of the engine. We'll be looking for this area right along here, your harmonic balancer. This is where we'll apply a little bit of pressure, gently raising the engine up. Once it feels as though it wants to stop, it's important to make sure you stop as well so you don't cause any damage. I'm being careful not to go where my belt is on this pulley. All right, let's start raising this up. We'll be paying attention to each one of our engine mounting bolts. Right there is where it feels as though it wanted to stop for me, so I'm not going to go any higher. Let's make our way over towards the driver's side of the engine now. You'll find that that's where your starter is located. Now, before we start messing around with the starter, it's important to make sure that you did disconnect that negative battery terminal up top. You don't want to ground anything out and potentially get hurt in the process. Now we'll make our way down here to one of the mounting points. You'll find that you have a 16mm nut that's mounted to a stud that goes into the transmission. We'll be removing this nut. Directly above that, you'll find that you have a 16mm headed bolt. Remove that as well. There's our nut. Right behind that is a washer. We'll give both of these an inspection, set them aside. We'll be aiming for this bolt right here, using my 16mm with an extension. Now that it's fully unmounted, we'll have to pull that out of the bracket that goes on the transmission lines. Just a quick wiggle should break that free. And there it is. Take hold of that starter. We're going to give it a little wiggle and start pulling it towards the front of the vehicle. Sometimes you will have to grab onto that little bracket that's for the transmission there, transmission line. We'll just take down the starter and we'll carefully rest this aside, being careful not to damage our wiring. At this point, we can continue removing the shield by removing 3 11mm headed bolts. The first one's right up by the oil filter, the other 2 are down near the bottom. There's one. Let's make our way down to the 2 lower bolts. There's the other one. With all those removed, we'll take hold of the shield. We can give it a little wiggle. You're going to have to start going straight forward with this because over on the driver's side, there is that stud that was holding the starter in place. Just slide that right off of there and then pull this down and out of here. Now we can start removing our oil pan mounting bolts. You'll find that you have 18 of these, 9 along each side. You can start with whichever side you prefer. We'll be using our 13mm to remove each of these. Typically when I'm doing this, I like to leave one in on each side while I continue. Before we go too much further on this side, I'll make sure that I start one of the bolts in. Get the last two on this side. Do the same on the other side. Over here, we'll do the same thing. I'll loosen that first bolt, make my way down the line. This front one. There we are. We can make our way along the back side here. We'll be skipping the one that we had loosened. The next thing you'll want to do is clean and inspect all 18 of your mounting bolts. At this point, we should be able to move the oil pan around a little bit. We'll fully remove those last two mounting bolts that were holding this. There's that one. Grab the other one, same thing. There it is. Take hold of that oil pan. We're going to give it a little wiggle and start bringing it down. We'll bring down the rear a little bit first, and then we'll bring this down and out at an angle. And there it is, friends. Now we can start removing our gasket. Ours is really falling apart. We can pull this down as well. At this point, with all the gasket out of there, it's time to start cleaning up the mating area where the brand new pan and gasket will go. We'll use a clean rag with some parts cleaner directly on it. I don't want to spray any parts cleaner up inside the engine. I could potentially cause some sort of damage. While you're cleaning this down, there's 6 areas that you want to pay attention to. 4 areas will be up across the front and the other 2 along the back, which I'll show you in a second. As for the front, you'll find that you have 2 areas that look just like this, one on either side of the engine block. Essentially, it's where 2 of these parts connect together. There's a small line in between. And then also along this groove, right along the front, where this starts to make its bend. Once we've cleaned and inspected those areas, make your way right down along the back side here. We're looking for this small groove. You can see by putting my screwdriver up in there, I can scrape out a whole bunch of existing RTV or gasket maker. We want to try to remove as much of that as possible. Once we've done this to both sides, we'll be using some gasket maker in all 6 of these areas. Just a thin coating will do. That looks pretty good. Let's get the same on the other side. Once you have everything scraped down, we'll continue on with a clean rag and some parts cleaner directly on it. You want to wipe down the entire mating surface where your brand new gasket and oil pan will ride. Now, as for the 6 areas that I was talking about, 4 will be along the front area here. You can tell that there's where 2 parts of the engine meet together. We'll come right down along this edge. And then you also want to make sure that you get along this corner area. We'll do the same over on the other side of the engine. As for the 2 areas along the rear, we just want to get down along where the side of it makes its way to the rounded portion, just right inside that little corner. Just put a nice little bead there. We'll do the same on the other side. Get this one over here. We'll just coat that, nice little bead. Once everything's clean, we'll be taking that oil pan gasket. We'll put it in place on the oil pan here. Try to align all of your mounting bolt holes, and we can get this onto the truck. Now we can take that oil pan and we'll start putting it in place. We're going to bring this up. You'll notice I'm coming at a pretty sharp angle. Now we can slide this up into the proper positioning here and start in all of our mounting bolts. Before we go too far, you want to double check up along the front to make sure that gasket is in the proper place. Start this bolt in over here. We'll double check along the rear as well. I double checked the back side of the gasket here. It is sitting perfectly, so we can start in the bolts making their way all the way around the back as well. Once you have all of these started in by hand, you can go ahead and snug them up. Okay, I've got them all started in. I'll bottom them out and then we'll torque them to 215 inch-pounds. Do the same on the other side. With them all snug, we'll get to torquing them. Let's do the same over on the other side. While we have our torque wrench out, let's continue on to torquing the drain plug on this. It's important to make sure that it's nice and tight. We'll torque that with our 16mm to 25 foot-pounds. Now we can install our shield. You remember, over on the driver's side of that transmission, you have a stud that comes out where the shield and the starter will need to go over. Start putting this in position. Now that we have the shield in the proper placement, let's continue on with our three 11mm headed mounting bolts. We remember we had two along the bottom and one up near that oil filter. We'll start them all in and snug them up. Right there is bottomed out. Just make sure it's nice and snug. Do the same to all. Those are nice and tight. We'll make our way over here to the starter. We're going to start putting that back in place. Keep in mind, as you bring it up here, up along where your transmission cooler lines are, you have a small bracket. That bracket will go on the outside or the forward side of the starter ear. We'll just kind of put this up here. I'm going to grab onto that bracket and move it out of my way. Now we can start in our mounting hardware. You want to make sure that you start each of these by hand before you tighten either of them. You can start in that upper bolt. This one's a little bit more difficult to get started on, obviously. We got to try to get our fingers up here. Once they're both started, we'll snug them up. Just make sure that's nice and tight. Now we'll do the same to the lower nut. Once again, making sure that they're nice and tight. There we are. We've got them both bottomed out. Let's make sure they're nice and tight. With the starter in place, we'll continue on to our two brackets. We had one along the driver's side and one over along the passenger side. I'll be starting along the driver's side. For this, I'll be using my larger bolt down along the bottom. We'll start that in. You want to make sure you leave this loose so you can still move this around, and we'll continue on to the upper mounting bolt. It's right up next to the motor mount. Swing this right up into place. We'll start in the bolt with the smaller head on it here. Now that they're both started, go ahead and snug them up. That one's nice and tight. Let's go over to the other side of the vehicle and do the exact same thing. Let's get this in position here. At this point, we can continue on to lowering the engine all the way down into those mounting brackets. Once we've done that, we'll continue on by snugging up those motor mount bolts. For the passenger side, I'll be using my 18mm on the bolt head up along the front here. 21mm to snug the nut, and then we'll torque it to 75 foot-pounds. Now we'll do the same on the other side. Keep in mind, this bolt is going in the opposite direction. So we'll be using a 21mm for the forward side and an 18 along the back. Up along the top in the engine compartment, we'll remove our upper rag, going across that throttle body. Continue on with the air filter box. We'll be putting this in position along the throttle body, and then we'll tighten that 8mm headed clamp. Now that that's down as far as possible, we'll tighten it up. Double check to make sure it's completely secured so no dirty air makes its way into the engine. Now let's make our way over to the passenger side of the air filter housing. Over here, we'll continue on with the air inlet tube. Just take that, slide it into position, and press it all the way on there. Next will be the breather hose. We'll be connecting this on. You want to press it on there as far as possible. Double check to make sure that it's nice and tight. If it slides off of there, you could try putting a wire tie. Over on the driver's side valve cover, we'll be continuing on with a funnel. I just want to start this in here. Now we can continue on by adding 5 quarts of 10W30 oil. After you've added all 5 quarts of 10W30, reinstall your oil cap. Let's reconnect our negative battery terminal. Press that onto the battery as far as possible. Use your 11mm to make sure it's nice and tight. We'll give it a wiggle to make sure that is secured properly. Now we can reinstall our engine oil dipstick. Once we've done that, we'll continue on to starting up the vehicle. You want to let it run for approximately 30 seconds and turn it off. After that, we'll make our way right back out here. Now that I've run the vehicle, I'll make my way right back out here. Remove that engine oil dipstick and we'll check the oil level. What we're paying attention to is the add area right across here. You have a safe zone, and then above the safe zone, you're going to have a maximum line. You should be just below the maximum. This looks perfect. At this point, I can reinstall our engine oil dipstick. Okay friends, we showed you how to do your engine oil pan and oil change. At this point, take a quick peek underneath the vehicle and make sure you don't have any leaks. After that, take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.